Alphonse Gabriel Capone, better known as Al Capone, is probably the most famous mafia boss in the world. This man earned his money with gambling, protection rackets, and especially with the illegal trade with alcohol during the time of Prohibition.
On track, now we going way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up, counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up.
On November 11, 1899, in the New York City borough of Brooklyn, Al Capone was born to parents who had moved there from Naples, Italy. The huge family was headed by his barber father, Gabriel, and his mother, Theresa. Theresa gave birth to 7 sons, including Al Capone, in quick succession. Capone spent his formative years in a Brooklyn area that was home to many people of Irish, Italian, and other immigrant ancestries. Because of this, he never showed signs of nationalistic bias. He was bright and athletic as a kid, but he lacked impulse control. However, he was not particularly noticeable and was instead seen as reticent. People who knew Capone back then were taken aback by his success in the business world. He dropped out of school in 8th grade and has since held a variety of occupations, including those in sales, as a bowling boy, in a munitions factory, and a bookbindery. He eventually got a job as a bartender and bouncer at the Harvard Inn on Coney Island, but he supported himself by joining local juvenile gangs and engaging in minor crime. As a young man, he moved to Manhattan and became involved with the 5 Points Gang's junior group, the 40 Thieves Juniors, as well as the Brooklyn Rippers. Capone was taken in by gangster Frank Yale in 1914 when he was 15 years old. Yale taught Capone the ins and outs of racketeering, usury interest, and other criminal practices. Capone looked up to Yale as a significant figure in his life. Most importantly, Yale showed him that roughness and ruthlessness by themselves would never get him anywhere in business. A few years later, when someone won $1,500 by cheating at Frankie Yale's saloon, Capone took it back from him on the way out, and the stranger yelled, "I know precisely who you are." And then Capone shot him. This was Capone's first murder. Capone and Yale agreed that the individual was to fault because he had previously promised revenge. It was impossible to prove Al Capone guilty of anything since no witnesses were willing to testify against him. Capone met Arthur Finnegan, a member of the Irish White Hand Gang who liked to trash Italians and had already clashed with them on multiple occasions. One evening, while collecting protection money for Yale, Capone attacked him unarmed, yet he was able to do enough damage on Finnegan that he thought he was dead. Finnegan made it, but he was in the hospital for nearly 5 weeks. For the second time, the police had no solid evidence to present against Capone. But Bill Lovett of the White Handers, a man so dangerous that even his buddies were wary of him, went on the hunt for Al Capone. So, towards the year's end of 1919, Frankie Yale had Capone relocate to Chicago to be with Johnny Torrio. Al Capone amassed a considerable amount of power and influence in Chicago in a short period of time. While his eventual seizure of the region from Johnny Torrio was a factor, the social climate of Chicago's underworld was crucial. Prostitution and illegal gambling both thrived there beginning in the 1870s. Many Chicagoans did not care about enforcing alcohol prohibition when prohibition was instituted nationwide in 1920. Additionally, there were pockets of middle-class society that flat-out rejected it. However, the reverse of the desired result of the alcohol ban occurred. Organized crime flourished, and not just in Chicago. This was due to the fact that illegal bars could, thanks to prohibition, charge significantly higher prices for alcohol. Over 600 gangsters are said to have worked for Capone to keep the competition at bay. Taking into account the effects of inflation, Al Capone's estimated empire-wide net worth of $1.3 billion in today's dollars. In 1929, 2 gangster bosses, Al Capone and George Moran, control the criminal underworld of Chicago. During the Prohibition, the war for control of the city's alcohol market continues, and it has become increasingly bloody. On Valentine's Day, 1929, tensions boil over and a bloodbath ensues. Capone's gangster pose as police officers in an malfeasance raid. While doing so, 7 members of Moran's gang are killed in an MP ambush inside a garage. This crime is being committed while Capone is in Florida. Despite the low likelihood of success, in 1929, Scalise, Anselmi, and Joseph Junta plotted to kill Capone. Frankie Rio, Capone's main bodyguard, or a waiter may have overheard the plot. Capone first refused to believe this, so he sprung a trap on the would-be killers. Capone and Rio pretended to fight at a dinner party. Then Scalise and Anselmi offered Rio a partnership and laid out their strategy. Capone's honor and devotion were broken. The group had a huge banquet on May 7, 1929, and they checked every single attendee for weapons beforehand. The autopsy found that the three victims, Scalise, Anselmi, and Junta, were already intoxicated during the banquet when Capone hit them with the baseball bat, and then the three were shot. Driver turned informant George Myers subsequently claimed that when Capone got angry this evening, everyone around him feared he had a heart attack. Capone was found guilty of a minor charge of failing to appear on the date specified on a summons on February 25, 1931. Capone was given a 6-month prison term but was able to stay out on bail. On April 3rd, a vagrancy charge in Florida was dropped at the prosecution's request due to a lack of evidence. The complaint of tax evasion in the amount of $200,000 was finally filed on June 5, 1931. Obviously, this amount was not very large. Only that portion could be verified, of course. Once again, Capone failed to accurately assess his circumstances, this time believing that he had reached a deal with the IRS that would allow him to plead guilty in exchange for a lesser sentence. The prosecution was unreceptive to any form of negotiation. Capone withdrew his guilty plea after Judge Wilkerson said he would not be bound by a previously agreed-upon sentencing reduction. It appears that Capone's legal team was ineffective. His seasoned lawyer, Tommy Nash, was mysteriously absent from the trial. Mike Ahern, who generally worked behind a desk, stepped in for him. It was on October 8 that what one observer called the hidden path to Waterloo occurred. The defense team for Al Capone barely used their appeals rights when the prosecution presented key evidence against him. The defense had no plan B and was overly wedded to the guilty plea. Not only that, but the plea wasn't exactly convincing. In June, many speculated that he would get between 2 and 4 years in prison. The press immediately responded angrily, stating the court system couldn't prove anything other than a tax offense and, in particular, no breach of the Prohibition Act. On October 17, 1931, a jury found Al Capone guilty on 5 of the 23 accusations against him, including 3 major violations that carried a maximum sentence of 5 years in jail. Al Capone was convicted to 11 years in jail and fined $50,000 for tax evasion in connection with money laundering on October 24, 1931. He was also ordered to pay roughly $8,000 in court fees. After being moved from Cook County Jail on May 4, 1932, Al Capone spent the first part of his time at a federal jail in Atlanta, Georgia. Despite being incarcerated in what was then the harshest federal jail in the country, he continued to run his business and even had some famous guests, including his mentor Johnny Torrio and infamous mob figures Dutch Schultz and Lucky Luciano. As a shoemaker, he was held up as an example for his fellow inmates. Though the warden claims that he and the other detainees were treated equally, his cellmates insist that he was pampered like royalty. He was able to earn some privileges through cash smuggling, presumably with the help of the guards, but they were largely symbolic. Even still, he found his confinement to be a heavy load. After his release, he remarked to a guard, "Sleeping is like running away." This quote was later published in the Herald and Examiner. A lot of people in authority worried about Capone's sway. That's why on August 18, 1934, he was moved to Alcatraz, a former fort in San Francisco Bay that had been transformed into a maximum security prison. There, newspapers were forbidden, letters were limited and censored, and visitors were strictly monitored. Capone was effectively isolated. Johnston, the prison warden at the time, attempted to curb Capone's rise to power among the convicts. In order to prevent bribery, we made sure they had adequate food and cigarettes. Since his sentence was shorter than that of other criminals, Capone made an effort to keep the peace. He avoided participating in uprisings, which earned him the wrath of his fellow detainees. Several very minor attacks were made on him, yet they were enough to cause him to lose much of his position and endure great hardship. On January 6, 1939, he was released from prison early for good behavior. One of Capone's prostitutes in 1928 most likely infected him with syphilis. As his time in prison wore on, his physical state deteriorated, but treatment improved his condition. For the past 8 years, he has been living in the Florida estate that his family owns. The stroke he experienced occurred on January 21, 1947. It seemed like things were looking up, but then pneumonia set in. At the age of 48, he passed away on January 25, 1947, surrounded by his loved ones. Fearing retribution, the body was first buried in secrecy at Mount Olivet Cemetery. It was only afterwards moved to the more secure Mount Carmel Cemetery. There were not as many flowers at Capone's burial as there were at St. Dino Banion's. Anthony Accardo, a powerful member of the group, restricted attendance to his own family and close friends. Capone's life was unique and exciting through and through, just like the life of a notorious mobster is. If you liked the video and want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel and give the video a like.